Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for attending our webinar today, Cloud-Hosted Accounts Payable Automation. We'll keep this pretty casual and informative for you, I hope. A few housekeeping items. If you have questions, feel free to go ahead and write them in and send them. We'll be monitoring the questions. More than likely, we'll handle all the questions at the end of the session just to make sure we don't have, keep the flow going. We don't have people coming in and out. So we'll handle all those questions. But we do encourage you, any questions that you may have, to go ahead and submit those for us. So by way of introduction, my name is Jim ORourke, and I'm on the business development side of the house here at ICG Consulting. And I'm joined by two of my colleagues today. I have Shauna Summers.
Hello, everyone.
And Michael Makings.
Hello.
Shauna is a subject matter expert, and Shauna has been on our project teams and has been a long-time employee of ICG, and she'll be doing the demo today, so she'll be driving the boat here after we get through a little bit of information. Michael is a business analyst and works with our project teams on accounts payable and other applications, and really helping our clients through the analysis phase and requirements and things of that nature. And Michael will be chiming in at appropriate points. So the agenda today, we'll start off by telling you just a little bit about us. For those of you who don't know much about ICG, I'll just give you a real 50,000-foot view of who we are and what we do and what we're all about. We'll talk a little bit about AP and some of our related solutions. Again, just give you a kind of a view of what our suite of products in and around the accounts payable area is. And then we'll jump right in. We're going to do an accounts payable solution demo today. And this demo, by the way, is going to be a real system. So it's not a demo system, an ICG demo system. This is actually a client system. So you'll get to see it in action, and we'll certainly talk about that as time goes on. And then we'll wrap it up with certainly answering any of your questions. We'll go ahead and have a Q&A session. All right, a little bit about ICG. We're really, we're not a canned software company. So I think it's always important for us to kind of define that out of the chute and kind of what our role is. So we're a solutions developer, and you're going to see obviously our AP solution today. But also what comes with that is those are tools that are 70 to 80% built, based on industry standard, and then that last 15, 20% is about us going in, understanding your unique process, your requirements, your culture, and then coming in and providing a system that's going to meet your needs. We're also a systems integrator because obviously to do this, we're going to have to integrate with all kinds of systems, and we'll talk a little bit as we get going about how we approach systems integration. And last but certainly not least, consultant. When we come to the table with these tools, best practices and working with you to make sure you understand, how these things fit into your process is always very important. We've been in business since 1990. We're based out of Arizona, here in Scottsdale, Arizona, but our focus is national. We have clients nationwide. Our focus is also strictly financial back office. So we kind of stick to our knitting, so to speak. We know what we're good at and what we've been doing for, almost 30 years now. So AP, AR, vendor management, those things in the back office, really transaction processing, intense processes is really where we shine. Our model really is to be ERP agnostic and systems independent. And what that simply means, what that simply means is we're not tied. You've probably undoubtedly been on demos or talked to sales reps or whatever for solutions that are very strictly tied to a specific ERP or specific system. Our application is designed to work with any system, and we have integrated and worked with virtually all the commercial systems out there and a few homegrown ones besides. So regardless of what systems you may be operating in, whether it's single or multiple systems in the back end, we have a lot of experience in integrating with multiple systems. Also, when it comes to our clients, we're also not vertically integrated. We have clients that span a lot of different businesses: distribution, energy, food service, retail, manufacturing. So we really bring a lot of experience from a lot of customers around the country, and that's important to us because there are things that other companies are doing that maybe you're not looking at. that becomes important to us. So we bring that knowledge from a very wide and diverse client base to bear. Just a quick word now. We're going to obviously spend our time today looking at accounts payable automation. Excuse me. But ICG does have a complete suite of products, and we're not going to get into that in any length. But just to make you aware of the fact that obviously we have a suite of products that goes everywhere from onboarding and compliance for new vendors to bring them on board, on through the payables automation, which we're going to talk about today. And then we have a lot of ancillary products starting vendor portal. So, capturing electronic invoices, payment inquiries, dispute management, a lot of those kinds of things that are really self-service in nature that augment your accounts payable that we offer as well. But today we're going to focus on accounts payable automation. And ICG's approach to how we automate in the cloud is maybe a little different from what you've seen in the past. Our model is really to host things in a single tenant environment. And what that simply means is it's the exact same system that we would put on your servers behind your firewall. We would lift out and put in the cloud to serve you. So the application is designed and built around your needs, around your company, around your processes. You're not sharing an application with hundreds or thousands of other different users. It's your application. We just manage it in the cloud, which makes it more efficient for us, more efficient for you, a lower overhead from an IT perspective. And one final difference I'll mention before we get started here is our pricing model is also different. Our pricing model in this cloud-hosted AP is really, it's not built on number of transactions or number of users. You can have as many users as you wish and pump as many transactions as you wish through the system. It won't impact your pricing. It's functionality based, and we take a look, we look at your requirements. We give you a fixed fee on kind of a monthly bill basis, and away you go. So there's a lot of predictability as far as your costs are concerned. Going in what it is, and you can grow the system and not have to worry about budgetary constraints from year to year. So enough from me. Time to turn it over now to Shauna Summers, and Shauna's going to jump in and show start the demonstration. Shauna.
Thanks, Jim. So as Jim said, we are actually in a live clients test environment, so just bear with us if you see anything, out of the ordinary here. I am actually logged in as a super user, and so what would happen is your users would log into a URL that's in the cloud, and they would land on this dashboard or sort of landing page. And then everything that you see here is very role-based, so not everybody's going to have the same cards or the same access that you're seeing here. But for today's purposes, we figured it was better to kind of log in as a super user so you could see basically the plethora of items and options available to you.
Which is a great point, because that Sean brings up is these systems are highly configurable because they're not outside of the box. Based on your business, model, based on your process, the system will be designed. So you may have as many cards in there, you may have more, you may have less. They may be different, and things inside of the card may be different. We'll talk about that going through, but keep in mind, everything we talk about today, the system is highly configurable.
Exactly. So one of the things here, and one of the reasons that we have these dashboard cards is not only to let your users know how many transactions are out there for them to process, in a variety of different ways for them to start processing items. It's actually very helpful from a management perspective. So instead of logging in, running reports, or manually going out there trying to figure out what's going on in your system, you could just log in as, say, a manager, look at all your various queues out there, and kind of get a sense of how many items are out there to be processed. We have a variety of different ways. We're just going to look at this particular card for right now. We're going to look at this non-PO review card. So right now, if I'm a manager, I can say, okay, we have 38 items out there. We also have a way to see the different types of items. So maybe I want to see how many non-PO items I have out there. I can kind of start a filter this way. We can also then look to see, we'll switch over to this card over here on the left. I might also really care about high priority items. So again, very configurable, and this is just sort of to give you a snapshot view into what's going on in your system.
really a great management tool when you think about it as your as AP managers and AP practitioners. If you're trying to figure out where bottlenecks may be, or you're just trying to monitor productivity or make sure things are getting through the system efficiently, you don't have to wait for a month-end report or whatnot. You can log in again as a super user and look at the queues and see what's in there, see how the flow is working, and if that's meeting your standards.
Exactly. And one more thing about these cards is today we're going to focus on the non-PO side of life, but as you can see, we also have the capability to handle PO kind of items as well. And so, again, depending on your process and your requirements, you may or may not have access to all the non-PO and PO items out here.
Great, and that's we'll talk a little bit more about PO and how that fits later on, because at the front end of the process, as you'll see, because non-PO type transactions do require more work, if you will, in going through the system and being reviewed and approved, as opposed to a matching system. But we do handle POs and exceptions, and we'll talk about that as we get later in the process.
All right, so we're going to basically take an invoice through the workflow system here. There's a variety of different ways to get items into workflow. You have your traditional paper copy, so if people are sending them to a particular mailbox and you need to scan those items in, we're not actually going to show you scan today because I'm sure you can imagine, you stick the paper in, you scan it in, everything's great. If you already have a scanning process, that's fine. We can integrate with that as well, or we have our own. It seems more common now is that people are getting invoices electronically. Vendors seem to be emailing them in or submitting them through a portal. So in that case, we're going to jump right into our first queue, which is our document assembly. You may also hear me say the DAT tool a few times, the acronym for document assembly. So this is when your vendors are sending in electronic emails. Typically, they're coming in through PDF, but we can handle the other various different file types as well. So you kind of have a task list here. So everything down below are files that have been imported into the system and are kind of waiting to be processed, or you have the ability to go out there and manually grab the files as well. So we're just going to take one that's already been imported. We're going to open it up. And you now have the ability to separate pages, maybe remove images that are not needed. So everything that you would do in a traditional paper-based process, you now have the ability to do online here. You may look at this particular file and say, you know what, this Brady Linen always sends us 2-page invoices. You can take your whole file, hit 2 pages, and everything in your file has now become a 2-page invoice. You have the ability to say, you know what, I think I messed up on that a little bit. We're going to put that back together. You have the ability to start looking at some of these images, and right from here, you can immediately delete that image. It's no longer part of the process. So these guys, or this step here, is basically getting all your scanned images ready to be indexed later on and approved through the process.
And the business case on this, as you might imagine, I'm sure the wheels are turning for a few of you, and how this, application really developed here at ICG is we had a number of clients who would receive, as Shauna said, primarily in PDF, but we're receiving through email a lot of invoices. And what was happening is they would have vendors that would do maybe a weekly invoice dump. So they would send in this big PDF file, but then within this PDF file, there would be numerous invoices of different lengths. And the only way they really had out of this process was, we have a couple of clients that really were in this position, and it's very, very, very expensive, is to go through and print those all out, then separate them, and then scan them back in and put them through the system that way. So as you can see, very inefficient way when you already have this electronic invoice to now, take it back out, put it back in paper form, scan it back in, digitize it again, and run it through. This hopefully alleviates a lot of that, or makes that certainly a much more efficient flow than, and a much less expensive, as you can obviously see, of having to print out all those invoices, scan them back in, and index them. This is a great way around that. So this tool has been very well received, and hopefully it's not for everybody, but hopefully some of you sitting out there are thinking, this really would be a pretty cool tool in my environment.
Exactly. The last thing I will just say is you're going to start to see a common thread as we go through the demo. Traditionally, our image viewer is always going to be on the right-hand side, and any sort of data elements or indexing information is going to be on the left. I'm sure Jim and I will say this repeatedly throughout the demo. Everything that you see here is highly configurable. If you call these invoice types, you could have a variety of invoice types, whatever is very specific to your company. You may call them document types. You can call them anything you want. From here in the DAP process, we are allowing the users to capture very specific pieces of information, but again, up to you. You can capture as much or as little information as you want at this part of the process.
And as you can see, some of the benefit of doing that would be for downstream processing. So if this were, say a high priority invoice versus a normal, it was an non-PO, but it had a high priority to it, and it specifically belonged to a specific business unit. You'll notice here we have property because property is a designation for this particular client. You're seeing an actual client's system here. They use property to designate, but you have business unit, be a division, department, location, whatever the case may be. So it may be for that specific one. So you can give it that, you can assign it that very specific information. So that's going to help you downstream because it's going to pop it in the right queue. It's going to put it in the task list with those designations so that when the knowledge workers start working on it and doing their indexing and their processing, obviously they'll understand that this is an important one. It belongs to this property, and on we'll go.
All right, so I'm just going to cancel this item. I'm actually going to go back to our home page here. So now we've gotten invoices into the system. We've either scanned them in or we've gotten them in electronically. Your next step, we call it HUDI, which stands for Heads Up Data Entry. So this is where you are now starting to capture that header and possibly GL information on the invoice. Again, variety of different ways to get into those items. For now, we're just going to focus on the non-PO side. So here we have our task list, and you'll see throughout all the other queues that we look at, the task lists are generally the same. Again, the information can vary depending on your needs. We can either present it, not present it. Sometimes with this particular step, people prefer not to have people or the users pick and choose their invoices. They're just going to go on a first in, first out basis. However, this particular company wanted to have their HUDI users have a little bit more say in the process. Sometimes we are finding that the HUDI users are a bit more knowledgeable than they have been in the past, and they're a little bit higher skill level. So these guys are kind of going with the new trend that we've been seeing.
But again, as managers, you can set that any way you want. One typical mode we've seen in the past, and a lot of our clients will use, is to automatically default by priority, for instance, so that obviously the users can't cherry pick. They have to process all the high priority ones before they can start working on normal or other things, as opposed to filtering that out on a user basis. So. Easily configurable, however your business works, whatever works in your model, this application will accommodate.
Exactly. All right, so now we've actually come into an item. We're ready to start populating the fields and indexing the item. As you can see, our image is on the right, our data is on the left. You have the ability to always pop your image out to a whole separate screen. So if you're somebody who works on perhaps 2 monitors, even 3, you have the ability to do that, and that way it will give you a much larger image on one screen and all your fields on the left. For today's purposes, I'm going to kind of keep it all condensed into one window, though. Our indexing fields are kind of broken into sections. We have our invoice information, our vendor, payment, and then down below we have the GL information. So we'll just kind of start at the top here with your invoice information. Again, the fields that are on here are completely up to you. We can have as many or little fields as you want. We can require certain fields if you'd like. Typically at this point in the process, your basic, invoice number, invoice amount, vendor number, those kind of things are required. We can also put in certain rules if you'd like. In this particular case, they want to be, So let's grab this one. Okay, so in this particular case, they want to be notified if somebody is indexing an invoice date too far out in the future. Again, that's just an example of sort of some of the soft warnings that we can put in. We can do hard warnings. We can actually prevent the user from completing items. Completely up to you. So we're just going to kind of fill out some of this information here. Getting down into the vendor section, there's a couple different ways that we can actually go find the vendors out there. If you happen to know the vendor number, great. We can do sort of a lookup based on the information that you're populating. In this case, we're only going to put in a couple pieces of information, and we're going to get back a variety of results. From there, we're actually going to grab ICG's vendor information. Jim, you want to talk about how the...
Yeah, that's a pretty important, pretty important piece of information there. Obviously, we're pulling back all that vendor stuff. You don't have to key all that in, make sure it matches up. And it really brings me to the point of talking a little bit about integration here. So obviously we're getting that information because we're pulling that back from your system. And we're polling your system, interrogating your system for information, and once we get a match, we're pulling information back and we're populating that. And we do that in a number of different places throughout the application. So it's probably a good point to have a little chit chat about integration. We do integration in a number of different ways. We can certainly do direct integration, real time, to where we're hitting your system in real time, getting direct access, to your back end ERP, and pulling that information out, populating it, sending information back, where the case may be. A lot of companies, have opted for either cost, security, or other reasons to go a different route, particularly in a cloud-hosted environment, where we're doing file-based integration, meaning you're sending us a file with updates on a regular basis. So we have a file that you're transferring to us of your vendor master, and any updates that are happening, we're getting those updates. So you can make the intervals of when you're sending us those files, hourly, twice daily, weekly, whatever you want. And again, it really does, based on your on your business process, how you'd want to set that. But the point being, you're either going to be in real time or near real time in terms of capturing the data and making sure we have active data that we're populating. So all those discussions take place once we talk to you and start doing requirements and having discussions. But just to let you know, there are several different options we have of passing information back and forth to your systems.
Perfect. So just kind of continuing down the flow of this work item, we now get to our payment instructions or payment information. Again, this is going to depend on your ERP and what information we need to send back in order to have the checks cut properly. We can do separate checks. We have a variety of different special handlings. Everything you see here, we would actually work with you and populate based on what you need and what you require. All right, now jumping down into the GL information, we won't spend a whole lot of time on this because it's very specific to, if you guys are using PeopleSoft or SAP or whatever your ERP is in the background. But we have the ability to start capturing the GL information right from Hootie. Like I said, some people choose not to do it at this step, which is completely fine. Some people want the option. Some people, say, always present it in Hootie, but we may or may not require it. Sort of similar functionality that we saw up above, you have the ability to start adding in your GL information, and we can start to, grab the GL information based on the user's typing in. So in this case, I'm trying to type in something that's actually not valid. So we don't allow the users to actually enter invalid information. So what I would need to do is come back, populate something that actually is valid together, and start going on my way. Again, the detail that you're seeing here is going to be completely based on what you guys have in the background.
Great. And one thing, this has really been a kind of a sea change in terms of how we see what kind of workers and knowledge workers we have, and kind of a sea change, on GL entry. Used to be the case that it didn't go in on this particular hoodie and the heads-up data entry section. These people were not necessarily knowledge workers and really didn't have access or the knowledge to operate GL line data. So that usually happened more in the review and approve process, where down the workflow reviewers who had more access to this, they may be actually at the specific location, whatever the case may be, to do that. We've seen a change, and we can do either way, by the way. So it doesn't matter if your business process is more geared towards you'd rather have the GLs applied at more of a review. We have a knowledge worker who may have more specific knowledge of specific locations. Then that's fine. We can do that. But we have seen lately now that having more knowledge workers up front who have the ability to add those GLs up front, and we've added those tools like favorites, get last GL, and other things to make that process much easier. There's much less guesswork. That's probably not the right word, but we can go in and say, okay, we know this is a utility bill. We know it's always from the same company. Boom, select that favorite, select the one we used the last time, and get on down the road. So a lot of functionality there.
Right, and favorites are really helpful. So say, you want to really make sure everybody always charges to the same GL for office supplies, whether they're buying it from Office Max or Staples or Quill or, even Amazon, wherever they're buying their office supplies from, but you want to make sure that GL is always used. You can set up your own favorites. You also have the ability to set up global favorites. So if you want to make sure that these particular GLs are used company-wide, we have something called global favorites. Your get last GL, if you want to make sure that you're always applying the same GL information based on based on vendor number and either property or division or whatever you guys have, we have rules in place to do that as well.
Great. Before we jump out of this and move on to the next queue, one thing, a question that we had, and I know we said we're going to save these till the end, but thought this one was kind of appropriate, and a couple of them actually, but is on OCR. If you have an OCR system that you're using, you're not compelled to use this, to capture all of your data. If you have an OCR engine and you're using that and you're capturing a lot of things, obviously, invoice number, invoice amount, invoice date, things of that nature that are coming off of your OCR system, we do have the ability to integrate with the OCR system. It's not throwaway. So we would obviously use that to the extent we could, take information from your OCR that you've captured along with the image and populate that. It also makes a good QC kind of application for OCR, which obviously in an AP environment becomes a big deal because of the relatively low read rates in an AP environment for OCR, the ability to come in and make sure and validate that the information is correct and populate it. So we can do that. We had another question is whether this allows kind of a point and click to pull data from the thing. It kind of does if I understand the question correctly. If we're in a direct integration mode, certainly there are things that we can point and click and pull things back from the ERP to populate things. Otherwise, we're looking at more of an OCR type capability where we're pulling, your OCR engine would do a lot of that, and we pull that data. So I'm not sure, maybe I didn't understand that question. If I didn't answer it correctly, then we'll give it another shot. But anyway, the bottom line is if you have an OCR application you're using it, you're happy with it, no big deal. It just augments this. If you don't, then this is really the way to go.
Perfect. Just real quick, so once you've populated this work item, odds are you're just going to hit the complete button. When that happens, we'll automatically pull up the next invoice in your list. So these people aren't having to go back to their task list all the time. Again, configuration point, but most of the queues, most people are working in sort of like get next mode or an automatically complete one item, bring up the next one for you. You'll also see in all the applications we have this route button. So if you don't know what to do with this item, or if you know that it needs to go to a different area of your business, you can always manually route an item across. So in this case, these guys can route this to vendor setup. We can route it to our review step or an exception step, or you could route it to a rescan queue. So if for some reason we're in here looking at this item and we can't read that image at all, we have the ability to either select a reason, or we can always tell them, put in a note and say why I can't read this item or why I would like it rescanned. So again, the ability to route to different areas or different queues, we would work with you guys on that as well. All right, back to our fun homepage here. So we've now gotten invoices in through paper, through electronically. We've kind of indexed them. The other way to get an invoice into your system is through an online check request or an online web form. This is going to look awfully similar to the Hootie queue we just saw. However, everything's going to be blank. So if you need to get an invoice going in your system, but you don't have a backup or you don't have a paper copy, you have the ability to submit this online form. An example, one of our customers had a comedian who was set to go on stage, and he refused to go on stage because he had not been paid and they had no record of his invoice. So they came out here, they filled out basically a check request form real quick, and next thing you know, Carrot Top's back on stage. So
yeah, true story. So,
yeah, true story.
Avoided panic, so gave it super high priority, put it through a check request, and bingo, Carrot Top got paid, and everybody was happy.
And I guess some people in the crowd would have been fine if Carrot Top never went on stage.
That is true.
Maybe hold on to approving that check request. But like I said, very, very similar. Up to you. You guys can pick and choose what you're going to fill out here. You have the ability to require an attachment or not, depending on your business process.
And a lot of approval validations built into that as well. So, online check requests. One of the use cases of that, is a lot of people for internal requests. Someone's going to a trade show, they need some money, or they need to pay for something kind of on the spot. So you get a lot of internal users, internal invoices, internal AP users using this. And again, so the appropriate validations are also built in, there, so that somebody is not approving their own invoice and
right.
Kind of a fraud check, if you will. So those appropriate validations are built in there.
Right. Okay, so everything's in our system. We're ready to approve this invoice. Again, let's pretend now I'm the role of the approver. I would not see all these various cards. I'm probably only going to see our non-PO approval card. So from here, we're going to go in. Now, these approvers are, of course, your approvers are always special, right? They're the busy guys. They don't have time to be looking at a lot of invoices because they're probably doing 24 different jobs. So in that case, the approvers actually have a special approve button, so they have the ability to approve right from the task list. So what we're finding is there are invoices out there that the approver only needs to see very basic information. They basically only need to see the vendor and the amount and maybe one or two other pieces of data. So in that case, if we're looking at this and I say, yep, you know what, I know exactly what this invoice is, let me just approve it. I don't need to see anything else related to this invoice. This is a huge time saver. The approvers seem to love it. AP loves it because our invoices are getting approved faster. We don't have this huge aging going on. However, there will be cases where the approver is looking at their list and they say, I need more information, or I'd like to see the image associated with that one. They always have the ability to go right into that invoice, just like we saw in the Hootie queue. So we're going to go ahead and open up one of these items here. And again, it looks just like we saw before. We have our image, we have our information. Now, some customers choose to allow the approvers to edit anything that they need to because they feel like it's their job to get this invoice information completely correct before it can be paid. However, we have other customers who prefer to lock down those fields or have the approver only see things in a read-only mode. Or there's a hybrid approach where maybe they can adjust the invoice number, but they can't actually change anything with the GL or the amount. So again, we would work with you guys. We have our recent activity information. We actually had it in the Hootie queue as well, but there's not a whole lot going on with that invoice when it just comes in for Hootie. If you're in more of an exception queue and approver queue, there could be some very valuable information up here letting you know why that invoice is either in your queue or some recent changes that's happened to it.
And that's pretty important. Again, it really, it gives that approver a little bit of history, so they're not looking at something in the blank. Some of those activities may be significant. Some may not. They may look at it and go, okay, great, who cares? Approve it, move on down the line. But there could be things in there that are significant and pieces of information that are significant to them. So it just gives them a little extra piece of information as they go through the process.
Yep, and so these approvers have a few additional buttons up here at the top. They have the ability to approve or decline, because basically their job at this point in the system is just to approve this invoice. We're hoping we're not declining a whole lot, but if they need to reject the invoice for whatever reason, they have that ability. We typically require them to put in some sort of reason of why they're not approving the invoice. Again, any of these options you can use, not use, you can add. You can always have them pick an other, in which case they would put in a note letting everybody know why they're not approving this invoice for payment. They have the route button similar to what we saw before. They can route this to a different queue within your system. They also have the ability to pend. So if they need to put this work item on hold, so say this came into their queue and they're not exactly sure what to do with this, they want to go talk to somebody else, they would need to get a hold of the vendor. There's a variety of different reasons that they basically want to put this item on hold. A lot of times these approval queues are shared by multiple people, so maybe Michael, Jim, and I all share an approval queue, and I don't want them to approve it because I have an idea of what's going on with this item. I can pend it for a set number of days, pick my reason and say, please don't touch this yet, because I'm going to handle that.
And a lot of times it's a simple case of you're waiting for another piece of information. That's just not readily available. That's going to come in, or that it's going to come in. So a lot of different reasons, but it really is a piece of functionality that gets a lot of use.
Right. Your approvers always have the ability to add a note. So in years and years past, you had paper invoices running around with maybe sticky notes or handwritten notes. Now you have the ability to do it all online.
And you have the ability, by the way, when you're doing those notes, you can make those. You'll notice there's a little checkbox in the bottom left where it says internal only. You can make those notes viewable, just strictly, for internal purposes, or even by specific people internally. So you have some capabilities there. And again, I'm sure as those of you who've been in AP for a while have seen some of the notes that get written on invoices or sticky notes, not necessarily for all eyes. So it's kind of important that you have the ability to restrict who can and can't see those notes.
Right, and one of the other features for the internal versus external is if you happen to have one of our vendor portals and maybe one of those notes visible to your vendors, that's another reason for the internal versus external notes.
Absolutely, yeah, good point.
Actually, I'm going to go ahead and add a note for this one just to show you guys. When you do add a note, we now populate our timeline increments by one, and that's sort of a visual cue to people throughout the system that there's a note attached. Let me just open this timeline for just a second. The timeline shows everything that's happened to this invoice from the time it was created through the life cycle of the system. So if major events happen, if a GL was changed, or if this was caught as a potential duplicate, there's a variety of different things that can happen to the item that we would then track. You can also choose to either view or not view certain parts of the information. So maybe I only want to look at my notes. We can do that. If we want to look at the major events, again, this allows the users to see as much or as little information that they want.
Yeah, and this is again something that people really like. In the timeline, we have a number of different ways to display this, but it's a great audit tool. So for both internal and external auditors, for those of you who are public companies who still have SOX and other types of audits you must pass, and you have to have the ability to track all the activity on a work item, be it a human, it's a machine, then you have that. It's also great for just, again, for an AP manager who's wanting to find out what happened. If a vendor calls in, there's some complaint, about it, or why it's not getting processed, or, a user from a different location calls and wants to know why the GL got charged to them, and whatever the case may be, you have the ability to go in and look at that work item and see who worked on it, who did what, when, and it helps you manage. So for both an audits as well as a management capability, it provides some pretty useful information.
Perfect. So in this case, I would hit approve, and the invoice would then either route to the next approver if needed, or it would route to your ERP upload. And the approvals are very, very intricate, very detailed. We work very closely with you to figure out how your approvals need to be determined and how many people need to approve a certain invoice. Usually it's based on dollar amount in GL, but again, that's very, very specific to you and your needs.
Yeah, a lot of different, again, configurability and functionality here. You can get very sophisticated with a rules-based system, where it's going to go on down the line by, dollar amounts, commodity type, location, whatever the case may be. So you may have 2, 3, 4 people in the whole approval process because it's all rules-based. If we know, okay, it's this amount and it's for this commodity code and it's for this location, it means it's got to go, through these various levels of approval. If it's, some huge thing, maybe on up to the CFO or CEO, whatever the case may be, we can set that, or we can use a much more simplistic approval and rules-based process. So we have a lot of flexibility there because this is the place we have a lot of variability between companies. Some companies want to keep that fairly simple. Other companies want to, build it on a hierarchy and have a strictly rules-based system. So a lot of flexibility there to get as sophisticated as you need to be.
All right, perfect. So now let's kind of just talk about a couple of these other queues. These are more the exception queues or things that happen to an item either manually or systematically routed there. Our non-PO review queue, or some people call it the exception queue, that handles things where maybe somebody, a lot of times if an approver or anybody in the system doesn't know what to do with an item, they're going to route it to exception or review. We have things where we have automatic system duplicate checks, and if we happen to find those, we route it to this review step for someone to take a look. Basically, lots and lots of reasons. In here, our task list, we actually have the ability to filter our task list. A lot of times management will say, I want, person A working all of my duplicates. I would like person B handling the GLs because maybe they're more in tune with your GL structure. So you have the ability to filter your task list this way. I'm just going to, in this case, I'm going to look for all my potential duplicates because I want to make sure I get those either removed from the system so they're not holding up the show, or look at them, say, yes, they're okay, let's move on. So let's just open one of these for now.
And again, while Shauna's open that, keep in mind, we're looking at these filters and these drop-down menus, all completely configurable. So whatever fits, you may see things in there that go, hey, that'd be great. We really want to filter. You may see some stuff I'd like to see in there, all configurable. So we can put in those filters whatever it is you want, whatever piece of information you need.
Yeah, and here's another good example of the recent activity. This one came to this review step because it did find a potential duplicate. In that case, when we find that, we try to help the user out as much as possible by giving them the ID of the item that we found the potential duplicate against and which information matched. And then that way, they can actually click on this item, go look at that actual duplicate. Again, if you're on double screen, much easier than what you're seeing here on my single screen. But then you have an easy way to compare the two items and determine if these truly are a duplicate or not. So I'm going to return back here. Again, just like before, you can see your various data elements. You can choose what they can edit, what they cannot, and then they would just complete the item. And then here's our Get Next mode. I completed it. The next item was automatically presented to me.
Great.
All right, we're going to go back to the dashboard.
Yeah,
here.
so one point I want to make here, because I know we're talking a lot about functionality in a non-PO environment, but certainly, again, and the reason being, up until this point, we're PO where you have a lot of approvals that are required, things of that nature, whereas in a non-PO environment. Whereas in a PO environment, you're hoping, the goal anyway is, right, you're going to do a three-way match and it's going to be fairly touchless. And our system would be no different. We would hope that as things come in, we capture the information and passes through the system. You get your three-way match, and then it goes and posts up to your ERP for payment. So there really isn't a lot of human activity and a lot to show because most of what's taking place takes place in the background. The exception of that, obviously, is for those things that don't hit the match. In which case, again, in the PO-based system, a lot of what you've seen in terms of the capture part of it is the same. Where the PO aspect of our system comes into play is again now the exception base. So it's coming through. We find, say you have something that's going through a PO system, and it comes through, and there's a discrepancy in regarding price. So typically price discrepancies are resolved by buyers. So you see right down here on the cards, you see a PO buyer manager review. Excuse me. So in that case, where you have a price discrepancy, that item might get routed to them to look at and make a decision. Yeah, that's fine. We're going to go ahead and accept this price, move it on. No, there's a problem. We need to contact the vendor and resolve that. Dispute the shipment, whatever the case may be. If it's a unit of measure, type of discrepancy, then maybe that's going out to someone different. That's probably going out to whoever the user was that ordered it. So, for instance, in a food and beverage application, if it's, they can make a determination on what they want to do with that. If it's a unit of measure, say they, ordered a gallon of milk and they got 4 quarts instead. Well, they made something that's fine. I don't care that it came in quart bottles versus a gallon bottle. I still want my milk. Or they can make a determination, no, that's, I wanted a gallon, the unit of measure is incorrect. So again, and whatever your process is, you may have other queues and other people and other rules, but the point being, in a PO-based system, when it kicks out of that matching process and it doesn't match, the system is going to make a determination why that is. Where was the discrepancy? Was it pricing, the unit of measure, was it something else, a damaged thing, or whatever the case may be, and it's going to route it to the appropriate queue, and then from there it's the same process that Shauna just showed you. In the non-PO, we're going to go through and figure out what the problem is and what the resolution is.
Perfect. Our only other kind of exception-based queues are our rescan queue up here. As you can imagine, this is where they're kind of fixing the images or looking at it and determining, I'm sorry, that's the best quality you're going to get. And then we have our vendor setup queue. So this would be items could automatically route here. If somebody were trying to key an invoice and they couldn't find the vendor, they have the ability to say that the vendor's not found. It would automatically route to this queue. People can manually route to this queue, so maybe they need an address, the remit to address change. So the vendor's already set up, but there's some kind of change needed. Maybe their terms have gone from net 30 to net 45, things like that. So it's sort of a placeholder for these guys to come in here. They can make whatever changes they need to in your vendor master and then complete the item, and it would return back to workflow.
And again, once you get a lot of flexibility, you'll see just in the task list here, sometimes in that vendor setup process, and you're all familiar with that, it may be something as simple as it needs a new remit to address has been submitted that you don't have in your vendor masters, that it doesn't match up, or some kind of a change in terms. That's easily fixed. Someone in your vendor services group or vendor setup group can go in, make that change, and do it. But there are also cases, and we see this a lot, where you're trying to control rogue spending. And lo and behold, an invoice doesn't come into the central, into the centralized AP. It goes out to one of your divisions or properties or departments, wherever the case may be, because they're buying from a vendor that hasn't yet been approved. And lo and behold, in your department, AP department, shows up this invoice and you have nothing. It's a new vendor. You have no record whatsoever. So in that case, again, you can route that over to procurement, to a buyer, send it back. Like we talked in the beginning, we talked about this vendor onboarding, solution that we have that a lot of our clients use. You can actually even route it if you were using that solution. You can route it back there, so it kind of starts that process of inviting that person to come in and start filling out the information to set up as a vendor. So a lot of different options here. Again, the point with all of this is to make the process a little more efficient for you, cut down the manual steps, and try to automate this process to the greatest degree possible.
Perfect. The last thing I'll show you real quick, and so we have time for a few more questions, is you have this search capability or retrieval capability. So if you're trying to find an invoice in the system, everybody has the ability to have this, the access to go search for an invoice. This is also very helpful if your auditors come in later and they just need to be able to search and find different pieces of information, they can do it that way. So I'm going to actually start with our in-process search. So I'm coming in and I know I'm looking for a particular invoice. However, I'm not exactly sure where it is in the process. I can use this in-process search, and if for some reason the results didn't come back, it would come back, tell me it didn't find it in process, so maybe it's already been paid in through your system. So as a quick example, I'm just going to pretend I know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for this particular item. So it didn't come back in my results list, so I'm just going to flip on over to my my other search option, and lo and behold, this item was actually paid. We have the ability to integrate with your ERP system. We can get back check information, check date, if it was void, canceled. There's various different things that we would work with you on. But basically it allows you to find an invoice. You have the ability to search and find invoices different ways. Say I got back 100 results. I have the ability to export that list and I can download it to Excel. I can go do whatever other research I need to do. You also can look at this item in more detail. So if the information on the results list doesn't give you what you need, you can open it and you would see it in a read-only kind of mode. So you can still see all your information. You can still see your GL. You just can't edit it.
Great. Yeah, and the two different, part of the reason for having the two different searches where you have in-process search versus, your total search. Obviously, you're anticipating whether that's in process and you try to find that you have a question, but then if you're doing for the entirety of the system, that's obviously a much greater search. You're searching through a lot more records if you're looking for all your history. So one of the reasons we segregate those is just so it's speedy. If you're looking for something in process, we're going to find that very quickly for you, as opposed to, and we're talking, very short amounts of time here. But in this world where people get impatient by nanoseconds, if we don't have to search through, millions of records to find something, we're only searching through hundreds of things that may be in process. That makes them for a much more efficient process. So, great, Shauna, you've done a great job. We do have a few questions to ask, and any other questions, we'll go ahead and submit them. We got a few more minutes left, so we'll try to tackle a few of them here.
I've been tracking the questions as they come in, Jim. We've got a handful of questions here, but first I just want to say thank you to Shauna for driving us through the demonstration, and thank you to you, Jim, for providing additional information along the way. So first question I think is a good relevant question here. This attendee, they say they have lots of electronic images and want to know how exactly those get into the AP application.
Great. Well, great question. Well, lots of electronic images. Not sure in this particular example how they're coming in, but typically we find those coming in through any number of different ways. So let's talk about that for a second. I think we talked about, for instance, the use of the DAT tool early on. So if you have electronic images coming in through your email system, the DAT tool would be the way that we would kind of bring those and ingest those into our system and stop putting them through the workflow process. And how we would do that is we would just, obviously we would be monitoring and polling that email box, that AP email box that is receiving those invoices and pulling things down as they come in there and running them through that document assembly process to where you can pick them up and do your thing. We also may be getting things through a vendor portal, be that ICG's portal, somebody else's portal, electronic invoices. Similar process. Again, it's a point of integration where you're passing those things. If you get on electronic invoices that way, you want to pass them through the workflow system. We simply can capture them by a point of integration, and we discussed earlier different integration methodologies. Same thing applies there. How we're getting that, whether that's real time or on file dumps at designated time periods, we can do it that way. That's another way they come in. Another way, Shauna, EDI. I know a lot of people use EDI. Let's talk about EDI a little bit because that certainly applies.
Yeah, we actually have several people using EDI, and of course, there's the standard EDI spec that's out there that everyone's supposed to use, and we find that all the vendors don't exactly use it according to the spec. So we definitely work with you guys. We have a number of people where about 90% of that spec's correct, but then, however, sometimes we need to actually default information or we need to change it up a little bit. So we have the ability, we call it EDI Lite. We use it as a basis. It's based on the A10 spec that's out there. However, we would definitely help you guys and get those electronic images in. And what happens is when we get the EDI file in, we create the invoice, and then we also create an image for it. So you would see your vendor number, your vendor number, invoice date, invoice amount, all the basic information. We would actually create an image, so that way your users can see an image rendition as well as the data on the left.
Cool. And this question just came in. A few questions regarding reporting. Is there a report that will show what documents were exported from ICG system to our Payable system in-house?
Yes, definitely. We have a variety of reports and different ways to get you information. we don't probably want to go through them all right now, but we can definitely walk through that with you. We have reports that can be manually run. We have reports that can be automatically emailed to you. So sometimes people have a daily file where they need information automatically sent. Instead of having people go out there and pick and choose, we can automatically send you an email that would have an Excel file with all the information you're looking for. Sometimes these search features kind of give you what you want. So you can pick and choose the data, run it that way, and then export those results.
And just as a, as a general statement, by the way, really any piece of information that is being captured in the system can be reported on.
Exactly.
So any activity that we looked at the timeline, you can see that we're granularity, we're capturing information from and activities and system activities. So virtually anything that's happening in the system, whether it relates to a document, a work item, a user, amount of time, whatever the case may be, then reports can be built on that. Typically we encourage our clients to use because they have a lot of business intelligence tools at their disposal, for us to provide the data, and they build their own reports, or we can build standard reports for you, or even talk about custom reports. But there's virtually nothing that's happening in there that we can't report on.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah, so there's a good question here. Can an invoice, when scanned into the wrong queue, be rerouted to the correct queue without printing?
Yes, actually, that's a really good question. So let's just grab one real quick. If we're in the non-PO queue and we're opening an item and we know right away that this should have actually been a PO item, we have the ability to come in here and automatically flip that to a PO invoice type or a doc type. And when we do that, it would then route to our PO queue, because there's different fields that are going to be required if you're a non-PO item versus a PO item. So you have the ability right here in the system to flip your invoice types without having to start the whole process over.
Great.
Cool. Yeah, we got a couple minutes left, so maybe time for one or two more.
Yeah, it says here, learn where the OCR areas are picked up, as well as remembering detail from prior invoices for the same vendor. So that would be like the favorites, right, Shauna, with a GL from,
well, probably the remembering is probably a little bit more of our get last GL functionality. And that way it is definitely based on vendor and either property or division or whatever you happen to be using. But yes, it's the system can learn, or you can actually choose to manually go out and get that GL information.
Great. Looks like we're running right up to the end here. So, for those, if we didn't get to all of your questions, please do, feel free to contact us. Everybody will be getting a copy of this. This is being recorded, so you'll have our email addresses are all on there. And you can reach out to us individually or go on our website at icgconsulting.com, and there's an info button that you can just click and submit questions. But I think we got to most of them. There's a few of them hanging out there, but so we'll also respond individually and send out some emails to answer those questions to make sure that none of those are left hanging. But
sure.
We very much appreciate your time, Shauna. Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Appreciate your time and your patience hanging with us today. Great questions. Hope you found this very, very informative, and we look forward to talking to you here in the future very soon. So thank you very much, and appreciate your time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.